good morning, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. When my husband and I met, this was one of the places where we came on some of our earliest dates. So it's really special to me to be here. So I'm the chocolatier at Purdy's Chocolatier. We've been in business here in BC since 1907, so it's a pretty cool honor to be creating chocolates that are enjoyed in our 80 shops across Canada. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about craft and chocolate and what really excites me about those things. I'm a compulsive maker. My poor husband deals with all my crap all the time, all my supplies. Like I decide to learn a new thing and then there's embroidery junk all over the house, and then there's painting junk all over the house, and then there's sculpting junk all over the house. And yeah, poor beleaguered man. I think the chocolate might make up for it. It's the cheapest way ever to make new friends. When I think of craft, I think of an octopus that's kind of latched onto my heart and soul, and it's wrapped my tentacles around my inner being, and it just doesn't let go. But it gently and carefully, thank you, gently and carefully lifts up my being towards new things. And chocolate was the first time that a particular tentacle never let go of its grasp. It was like the thing that I just had to pursue. So it happened when I was doing my second degree. I was trying to get into medical school, and I was on a wait list for med school 3 years in a row, which is painful because 700 people apply and 85 get in and you're number 93 or something. I would have way rather been at the bottom of the list, because then I would have known that maybe I should just give up and do something else. So in my third year, it was either write the MCAT again or do something else, and I decided no more MCAT for me, and chocolate had really started to grab me. I started doing it for fun, for friends, and then they wanted to buy them, and I said, "You're crazy, I'm not a business person, that would never happen." And then the next year I was really broke, and I needed to pay my hydro bill in Winnipeg in winter, and I took my last $80 and I bought a big bag of chocolate, and I turned it into 300 truffles, which became 1,000 truffles, which became 3,000 truffles, and then they were the ugliest chocolates on the face of the planet, and I didn't know why, and the scientist in me was like, what am I doing wrong? And then I decided to figure it out, and I signed up for actually an online course, and I took a 3-month class in chocolate technique and theory. It was the second class offered by a school called École Chocolat, which is still going strong, and I'm actually on their faculty now. And that got my start in technique and theory, and then I interned all around the world to hone my skills. So that's just a little bit of background about how that got started. Chocolate was the perfect marriage to me of science and art, and then it was super social. It made people happy, and I could gather people around me to taste things, to try things. I'd have packaging parties, and it was just unlike anything I had ever done before, and I was totally, completely hooked. And there's so many things about chocolate that have captivated me, and as time has passed, I realized that so many steps in the process of chocolate making are amazing metaphors for how we learn and how we grow and how we create art. The first one and most obvious is growth. Chocolate does, in fact, grow on trees, and it's really important to the flavor of the final chocolate where it grows. Just like fine wines, the terroir of cocoa beans is really important. It can take on flavors from the air and the water and the soil. And when you commit to a craft, trying to make anything, in fact, to learn a new skill, you're committing to your growth. So, just is a pretty obvious low-hanging fruit metaphor, no pun intended. So this is a little illustration I did of a cocoa plantation. So the pods grow right off the trunks of the trees, and if you want to look at one, I actually have a dried one here. You can check out after the talk that came from, I think, from Peru. So what's really important when the pods have grown and they're ready for harvest is they have to be really carefully macheted off of the tree. You use a machete, and I actually have one, and I meant to bring it this morning, but I can't find it. And and it's kind of scary. I found it among my predecessor's things at Purdy's, and I had it on my desk for a good long time, and it's real big and real sharp, and then I thought maybe I shouldn't keep a weapon on my desk. Put it away, and now I can't find it. It's a really big, scary tool for a very delicate job. The cacao tree is nothing short of persnickety, and if you don't treat the stem right where the pod grows off, that part of the tree will never produce another pod. But if you cut it just correctly, that same stem will produce new fruit. And I love this as an image for when you're early in learning a craft, because everything is really tenuous and fragile, and it has such potential to become something beautiful, but it can be very fraught with the tension of trying. Early attempts of making something are really clumsy, like using a giant knife to cut a tiny, delicate stem. And this is how I feel about my earliest attempts at chocolate making, those really ugly early truffles. And it was just klutzy and really, really, yeah, I was so scared to melt that first bag of chocolate. It was so much money to me, and it was so much materials, and I was scared to do it. And I hear this all the time from my students, like, I really have to melt 2 kilos of chocolate all at once? Yeah, you do. You gotta try, you gotta jump in, you gotta try. And to me, that's like taking the machete and cutting off the tiny, delicate pod. So once the pod is cut from the tree, it's cut open and the beans are removed, and they're poured onto banana leaves or into wood boxes to ferment. Have you guys ever been around something that's fermenting? It really stinks. And the best things, though, come from fermentation. Cheese, bread, wine, beer, coffee. Kombucha and sauerkraut are maybe a little more questionable on the line of delicious things, to me anyway, but cheese, bread, wine, and chocolate. Chocolate is a fermented food, and that's what working away at your craft is like when you're at the beginning. Like, let's be honest, it really stinks. Like, it's that moment when what you see in your mind's eye doesn't at all match what your hands are putting out. It's really hard to keep going. It's that moment when you consider giving up, like it stinks and it's difficult and you don't really know what's gonna come out. And fermentation is like that, because when we ferment cocoa beans, we actually use wild yeast from the forest, and we don't know what's gonna happen to the flavor of those beans. But that fermentation is key to development. You'll see in this drawing that the beans represented there are actually white, and that's legitimate. The beans are white when they come out of the pod. They don't look like chocolate at all, and they actually taste like if a pineapple and a passion fruit and a mango had a baby. They're really, really fruity and tropical. They don't taste at all like what we know as chocolate. But we don't know what the final flavor is going to be like until the beans are removed and dried and turned into chocolate, which is steps and steps later. So that's the same way when you're like learning a new skill. You don't really know what's going to come out and if what is in your head can translate to whatever medium you're working in. After the fermentation is done, beans are dried and packaged and sent to be processed. And processed is another bunch of steps. And each one is key to the final flavor of the chocolate. When I was typing this out, I wrote roasting. It's the key pain. And I meant to write key point, but I had to keep it in because roasting is really a pain. You can do it over, you can do it under, you can like totally ruin the flavor of your beans really easily by roasting them incorrectly. And roasting, in fact, is one of the largest secrets that chocolate makers keep to develop the final flavor of their beans, and it actually varies from harvest to harvest of cocoa beans. So if you're the kind of chocolate maker that wants to make the same chocolate over time every single time so that your customer always expects the same thing, you're kind of screwed. You have to like really experiment every single time. And for me, this translates to a metaphor for when you have your skill and you're developing your craft, and you can paint or you can draw or you can capture what it is in your flavor, your image, your sound, but it still hurts to get there. Roasting is hot and fiery. It's really uncomfortable. And I have a picture here, little illustration. That's actually what a cocoa bean roaster looks like. It's a round tank that tumbles the beans round. It's very similar to a coffee roaster. And those beans go in there, and the beans are small. There's actually a container of those too if you want to look at them. And they're actually really valuable in history. One of the earliest Spanish explorers that encountered cocoa beans in the New World wrote in his journal that they overtook a trading boat. So some Spanish conquistadors were in South America off the coast of an island called Guanaja, and the conquistadors boarded this trading vessel. It was the best way to find out what was valuable in the region, and it was a pretty violent act. Like, you can imagine some Spanish guys trying to raid a Mayan trading boat. And Mayan merchants were actually warriors. They had to work really hard to protect their goods, so there was two armed peoples clashing over the contents of this boat. And during this altercation, a basket of cocoa beans fell to the ground, and the traders dove to the ground, and the conquistador wrote in his journal that they tried to pick up the beans as if they were as precious as human eyes, which is a really powerful image for what those beans meant to those people. They were currency at that time, and it's a really important thing to remember when we're eating chocolate, that we honor the bean, and that it has a long, thousands and thousands of year history of being something really, really valuable. And so when we put the beans in the roaster, we always think of that. We think of what their worth is, what their value is, and what kind of joy and pleasure they will eventually bring people. So the next step after cocoa roasting is called winnowing. And it's when the beans are crushed and they separate the hull of the bean from the bean itself. So if you picture a peanut and that thin skin around a peanut, it's really bitter, that thin skin. So when a peanut butter maker makes peanut butter, they take that thin skin off and just use the peanuts. It's the same with chocolate. It has a thin skin around it that's really bitter and tannic, and we don't want it in our chocolate because it's going to make it taste bitter and terrible. So we winnow it by crushing the bean into pieces called cocoa nibs and blowing the chaff away. And when you are developing your craft, this is really important because it's putting away the ideas that don't work. It's blowing away what doesn't grab you and what tastes bad or what just isn't quite right. So it's the pattern that's half sewn sitting on top of my armoire because it doesn't quite fit. And it should just go out of my house, but it sits there anyway. Like I said, my poor husband. So winnowing is really important to make sure that the flavor is pure, and it's the same in a practice of craft. You want to get rid of the things that aren't working for you and pursue the things that are. Now this is where my metaphors start to become very literal and imagery like that to a little bit more metaphorical. So once the chocolate is winnowed, the nibs go into a grinder, and it's literally a grind. And it's a pretty easy thing to draw a parallel with craft because it's like Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours to Expertise or Bryan Adams' guitars played until his fingers bleed. It's cocoa nibs being placed between 5 giant granite stones and milled from several millimeters in size to several nanometers. So it goes from quite large to quite small. I don't have a picture of this because it's just brown liquid. It doesn't look that fancy. It doesn't look that interesting. If I was a cocoa nib, I would probably think it's painful to get ground down from millimeters to nanometers. And for me, in honing my craft, I was really lucky that I had enough money and just enough support that I got to develop my skill and get good at what I do by other people paying me to make chocolate. I'm really, really lucky. And in my other endeavors, I embroider, I paint, I draw, I do other stuff. I'm trying to write a novel. I feel that pain all the time. Like I feel the pain of trying to hone the craft and trying to keep going and put in those hours and put in that work and to refine my skills. The pull towards the practice it feels like it has little reward when you're in that space, but it's where the things start to smooth out. And that's the thing in refining. It goes from something crunchy, coarse, and difficult to eat to something really beautiful and smooth and pleasurable. After the chocolate is refined, sugar is added, and the sugar is also refined until the sugar and the cocoa nibs are as smooth as each other. And then the chocolate goes into a machine called a conch. A conch was developed by a pretty famous guy, Mr. Lindt. Probably everybody's heard of him. He decided that he didn't like some of the bitter flavors in chocolate, so he created a big tank called a conch, and it warms the chocolate and circulates it so that the volatile oils inside of the cocoa bean evaporate and into the air, again, another stinky process, and all the sweetness and all the character of the chocolate is left behind, and it's not overwhelmed by bitterness and tannins. When I first made chocolate from the bean, which to be honest is not really my area of expertise, but I have done it a few times, my recipe said conch for 6 to 56 hours. Can you imagine if you tried to bake cookies that way? Like, you would get nothing, right? You would get charcoal or dough. Like, it's impossible. So conching is a really uncertain process. It's where the craft of the chocolate maker really comes in, and it's very, very uncertain. And in my house right now, I have a young human trying to learn his craft. My youngest son is learning to be a chef. And he's 16 years old. He's about to go to VCC in grade 11. to do his practical training, and he cooks all day at school, and then he comes home and cooks some more, and then on the weekends he goes to his job at a country club restaurant, but he cooks before that and he cooks after. So he's really obsessed. But it's really cool to see someone in the state of uncertainty that is this part of a craft. And so I'm going to tell you a little story about a lobster. So this is a chocolate lobster I made. I couldn't bring him today. He was really delicate and he wasn't going to make the trip. But a few months ago, Noah called me at work and he said, can you stop on the way home and pick up a lobster? And I was like, what? A lobster? And he's like, yeah. Just for a bit of background, like, this is a kid who never voluntarily touched a vegetable in his life. And he ate hot dogs and apples till he was 10, and that was it. And so now he's calling me to pick up carrots and onions and turnips, and I'm about falling over. And then he calls and asks for a lobster. And it turned out that day was the day before Lunar New Year. And the only place to buy a live lobster is T&T Grocery, so there was no way. Like, I was not standing in line at T&T for a lobster the day before Lunar. And so I said, nope, no lobster today. He said, okay. So a couple weeks later, called my husband. I said, hey, I'm on my way home. Where are you? He said, I'm good. I'm on my way home too, but I got to stop and pick up a lobster. I said, oh, Noah got to you, did he? He said, yeah. And I said, well, I think we're going to be home around the same time. Do you want to drop off the lobster and walk the dog and come meet me at the SkyTrain? We can walk home together. And he said, yeah, that sounds great. So he goes to the store. He picks up the lobster. He runs it into the house, gives it to Noah, grabs the dog, and walks to the SkyTrain. And we go he comes to the train, meets me, we walk home. 15 minutes later, we're back in the house, and Noah is yelling, Dad, where did you go? And Andrew's like, what do you mean? I just went to the SkyTrain to pick up Rachel. Like, what's the big deal? And he says, I don't know what to do. And the lobster is on our counter, just wandering around. He doesn't know how to pick up the lobster and put it in the giant pot of boiling water. And he has his materials in front of him, and he just doesn't know what to do. He's so uncertain. He's just in that moment of I want to learn this thing. I want to do this, but this is a big, expensive thing, and I'm going to ruin it. And I don't know how to do it. And our dog runs in, is barking at the lobster, and the lobster's wandering around. And so Andrew and Noah tag team getting the lobster into the water. And to me, this is the metaphor of that uncertainty. When you're making something and you just don't know how it's going to work out. And when you're new, you don't have that confidence yet to just go for it, to just try, to just trust that in the trying, you're going to be better, you're going to get better, you're going to get where you need to go. So that's my lobster story. I love Noah, and I love that he's cooking lobster tonight. We're having lamb. It's pretty exciting, actually. He's probably starting cooking right about now. I think he might have skipped school for it, actually. So once the chocolate is conched, back to chocolate, away from lobster, the chocolate has to be tempered. And tempering chocolate is the act of organizing the cocoa butter molecules to keep all of the flavor particles of chocolate in order. So cocoa butter is what gives chocolate its structure. It's a solid fat at room temperature. It's actually what lipstick is primarily made of. So if you've ever bought a tube of lipstick, you've probably bought a tube of cocoa butter, and it kind of tastes like lipstick by itself. But when you add sugar and the cocoa solids and all the rest of the parts of the cocoa bean, you get something really beautiful and delicious. But in order for the cocoa butter to set, you have to organize the molecules. Left to set on its own devices, it becomes chaotic. So if you've ever left a chocolate bar in your car on a summer day and then thought, oh no, it's ruined, and chucked it in your fridge, and you take it out and it's all white and swirly and stuff, that's because it wasn't cooled under the right conditions. So in order to do that, you need a perfect combination of time, temperature, and movement. And this is where the art of the chocolatier really comes in. It's making order from chaos. This is the place where my students are like, oh my gosh, I have to try this. I have to melt the 2 kilos. And I'm like, yeah. And then when I am teaching them how to do this, what do I say? I say, practice, practice, practice. I have 3 interns sitting in the front here. They must have heard me say that 17,000 times in the last 2 months. And that's my mantra for my students. When you temper chocolate, you have to understand its behavior, you have to watch it, and you have to understand how it's going to work. It's not just a straight temperature curve. You can't depend on the temperatures, because temperatures are, it's possible for the chocolate to be tempered in the correct range, but it's not a guarantee. You also need the right amount of movement and the right amount of cooling and the right amount of time. So those three things have to work together in perfect balance to make chocolate that's going to be the perfect setup to make that beautiful smooth shine and snap. And when you get that, what happens is you have a perfect crystal. And our taste buds really love two things. They love perfect crystals, which is why salt and sugar make everything taste better. And they love perfect fats, which is why butter makes everything taste better. Chocolate is the only food that, when it's perfectly tempered, is both of those things. So that's what makes it really special. And it's what delivers all the flavor molecules more evenly into your taste buds, so you can really experience the full flavor of the cocoa bean. For me, when you get this, when you understand it, when it happens, it's what craft is. It's pure, total joy. So this is me making the lobster in my flow, really having pure, total joy. So finally, the last step in chocolate making is molding, which means whatever shape you're going to finally put your chocolate into. It's where the chocolate is made into a bar or into a bonbon. It's the place, to me, with the most potential. It's where it's mixed with other flavors to create bonbons and bars to cover marshmallows or caramels. This is actually, in reality, the place where I spend most of my time. It's also the place for me of true collaboration. And I actually have something for you guys to try. This is, I'm going to get my team from Purdy's here to come up and get these trays and pass them out. This is called Ocean Peach. It's one of our new flavors celebrating different regions of Canada. So this is to honor BC and its Okanagan peaches, and it's got a slight hint of sea salt to bring in the reminiscence of the ocean. So picture you're kayaking on a hot summer day, and you pull over to have a picnic, and you pull out a ripe Okanagan peach, and you're breathing in that salty sea air, and you're eating a peach, and that's what this chocolate is supposed to take you to. So this place, the place of making a piece full of deliciousness, is the place of collaboration. I'm always honored that people trust me with their taste buds. From the moment I sold my first bonbon, I was really humbled that someone would pay to taste something the same way that I do. But this is also the collaboration part, because not everybody's taste buds are the same. In fact, I hate coffee. Sorry, I don't drink it. It feels weird to me. It's just not my thing. So if I want to make something coffee flavored, I gotta get a team together who love coffee. I always work with a team, and I always have, to make sure that what I'm creating isn't just delicious to me, but to as many people as possible. So after this craft has been mastered, this is the place where the project gets finished, the chocolate gets eaten. This is the place of completion and joy, and it's the place where chocolate and craft have totally grabbed me. So thanks so much for having me today, guys. Enjoy your chocolate. First question?
Hi, so in our discussion, we were just thinking about at what point, say in the creation process, do you know what you want to make? Say, like, do you know ahead of time? Is it in the middle of the process, or sometimes even only when it's done?
Oh, that's a really good question. I do a really wide variety of things when it comes to chocolate. So sometimes what I do is dictated by just my own ideas. So for example, the Ocean Peach was part of a passion project for me to bring to Purdy's a wider range of culinary flavors that represented Canada. Prior to that, we really only had ice wine and maple syrup, and I think that Canada is much richer than that. So when I started at the company, I was like, if we really want to be Canada's chocolatier, then we need to have a wider range of things that represent our culinary heritage. So it took 2 years, well, actually almost 3, because this year is the year it's fully launched from when I started, but we have a new collection out that this is part of, and the other pieces in it are Saskatoon berry representing the prairies. There's a white spruce piece, which to me exemplifies walking in a cold Manitoba forest in the wintertime, and so it's like minty and herbal, and really it has some vodka in it, so it's like yeah, it's really amazing. And then we have a piece that is sake and sakura with cherry blossom to represent our home here in Vancouver. It's made with Granville Island sake and cherry blossom. And then we have a few more pieces coming out in that range over time. We have a blueberry buttermilk coming out this summer with with blueberries, low bush blueberries from eastern Canada rather than our western high bush blueberries, which have a significantly different flavor. And then I'm working on a piece to represent the East Coast, which is birch syrup and red currant, which are both things that grow on the East Coast. So for me, that was like a big part of the passion, and I had the idea first and then spent a lot of time executing it. Otherwise, it comes in other directions, like we hear things from our customers about something that they want or something that they're missing or something they feel we should have in our repertoire, and we really listen to them. If we hear the same request for something over and over and over again, we listen and try to repeat. For example, I'm working on a champagne truffle right now, which is a really classic piece, but we haven't had one at Purdy's for at least a decade. And when we did, it was a little bit old-fashioned, so we're bringing in an updated champagne piece next year. So because we saw our customers repeatedly asking for a champagne truffle. So it kind of depends on what direction it's going to go, and the process could begin and stop after like one iteration, or it could be an idea that we're so committed to that we iterate it until it comes to fruition. So it's quite complicated, and I could do it any way, and I do that in all of my kind of creative processes.
All right, coming right to you.
How do you maintain the craft at a scale that Purdy's has?
Oh.
Because you get so far away from the chocolate. You have however umpteen many stores compared to a small chocolate shop. How do you maintain that touch point?
Yeah, so we're actually shockingly hands-on at Purdy's, and actually, for me, I still hand make everything in my test kitchen before it goes out to manufacturing, and part of my job is the scale-up process of how something starts small and then becomes wider, but a lot of our processes are still very artisanal. For example, the chocolate you had this morning was hand-sprayed with cocoa butter to give it that color, and so it's very hands-on, and people are often surprised when they come to our factory to see how many people are actually working with the chocolate as a touch point and how hands-on we are. For example, one of our most popular products is called Sweet Georgia Browns, and they're yeah, right? They're a roasted salted pecan with a handmade caramel and chocolate on top, and all of that, each one of those parts of that piece is hand deposited by a human into the trays that become the Sweet Georgia Brown. So it literally is actually still very hands-on, and we do have some automation, but it still is very, very craft-oriented. Yep.
All right, who else?
I've got a couple up here.
First of all, thank you. Second of all, we heard a lot of places where things could go wrong, or there might be waste, and so I'm curious about how this process has evolved. What can be reclaimed? What do you do with what doesn't work? Just anything around that.
Yeah, that's really a great question. So what's really cool about confectionery is that almost nothing goes to waste. Because chocolate can be remelted like 7 or 8 times before it can't be remelted and reprocessed again. So a lot of things, like if we have a bar that doesn't work out, it can actually just go back in the tank, get remelted, retempered, and redeposited. So it's one of the really beautiful things about chocolate. And then if we have stuff that we've made fully and it's not perfect, we do have like a seconds section of our shops and on our website where people can buy things that we call almost perfects, where they taste delicious but don't quite look right. So yeah, we don't really have a lot of waste at all, and it's one of the beautiful things about confectionery. And then when we do have sugar waste, we're actually working on a diversion program to take it out of organics waste and send it to animal farms for feed. So particularly the pork industry uses a lot of carbohydrates to grow pigs that have good bacon. Pig farms really like our sugar. So we're working on getting that to farmers instead of to the compost.
Thank you. All right. Another,
Thanks very much. We were just curious if you could share a little bit more about the molds, and are those things that you make, or do you come up with them and have them made elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. So mold making is my current obsession. It's a skill that I'm learning. It's actually a really specialized skill. So far, everything we do at Purdy's is something that is either like been a stock mold that we've just been able to order from someone, or these ones we actually had made. It's a very common shape, but we had it specifically made to fit into some of our processing lines. And this shape we chose particularly because we were just launching the idea of these colored chocolates. So the way those are made is we take an airbrush and we spray colored cocoa butter, and the color is all natural. It's made from fruits and vegetable juices. And we spray it into the mold, and then we deposit the chocolate inside. And then when it's all set up, we take it out and that color adheres. So we chose the dome, the round thing, because that's the easiest one to learn that color process on. And we're actually the largest chocolate manufacturer in the world doing that, and we're the only one that we know of that does it with all natural colors. So it's something to be really proud of. And if you want to see how that's done, actually, we have tons of videos on our website. There's a section called From the Chocolate Kitchen, which has all of our feature flavors on it. And if you can go and find those videos, they're all under every product. So if you see something that looks like that, you can just click on the video and watch how it's made. You can see the spray process and the molding and all that stuff. And you can hear my annoying voice again, because I do all the voiceovers. Yeah.
All right. I think we're going to have this question and one more. So,
So I know that your purple bags, you are totally beloved, because if you walk anywhere on the streets of Vancouver with a purple Purdy's bag, the little old ladies flock to you.
It's a true story. Cheapest way ever to make friends. Yeah.
How can you attract the millennials? How can you keep the little old ladies? And because you said you were making an updated version of the champagne truffle.
Yeah, so that's a really great question too. So that's actually one of the reasons I got hired at Purdy's, was to make sure that our flavors were resonating with a wider generational span. And so we went from launching, prior to when I started, we went from launching 2 to 3 new products per year to 17 last year. And so that's my job. I create all those new things, and my whole thing is to make flavors and colors and presentations that are gonna grab that audience, and to make them as committed to our brand as their grandparents are. It's really interesting though, because we are across Canada, and it's really seen that way here in British Columbia, because we take Purdy's for granted, because we've been in here for 111 years. But in our Ontario market, we're seen as kind of like the new up-and-comer. So it's totally different when you go to visit that market, and there it's like that's where the millennial wants to be, because they're not used to getting a box of dairy creams from their grandma at Christmas. They're used to like going in and trying the new and innovative things. So it really kind of depends on where in the country we are. And we only opened our first shops in Saskatchewan and Manitoba last year. So prior to that, we were only in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. So we've slowly grown to be across the country, and every market's a little bit different when it comes to that. And also, I'm always really surprised. Like, I was at a party not long ago with friends, and they introduced me to their friend, and he said, "Oh my gosh, dairy creams remind me of my grandma." And for him, that was his favorite because of the nostalgia. And so nostalgia is a really big thing when it comes to food, and anything that reminds you of those people that you love that are older and maybe gone are things that you're going to hang on to, even if you are a millennial and you're still looking for that new cool gourmet thing. You're still going to buy that traditional old school thing. Yeah.
awesome. Last question. Who's it going to be? No one? Oh, nice.
I was just wondering if you could describe more of that transition of, like, when you said you had it kind of chocolate latched onto your heart and you have that joy, like, versus like how you've described you have so many other interests and things you like to try.
Yeah.
What made you do you think that stick over other things that you could have gotten into?
That's really a great question. I think that for me, I saw the joy that chocolate brought other people. Like, when you're a painter or a photographer or a musician or whatever, you have to struggle to find your audience, and chocolate is almost universal. And like, I used to want to be a doctor, and then I baked a cake for my aunt and uncle once, and my uncle said, "I don't know why you want to be a doctor. You should just make food. Nobody wants to see the doctor, but everyone wants to see the chocolatier." I was like, yeah, he's right. And I think that's it. I think it's because it's like such a deep place for connection for people, food is, and chocolate in particular is so special that way, that when I had the opportunity to get into it, there was no way I could get out again. Thank you so much, everybody.